Welcome to this sleep bonnet sewing pattern tutorial. Find more patterns and tutorials at standardcurio.com. Today we will be using the PDF sleep bonnet sewing pattern by Standard Curio, which includes 3 adult sizes. Okay, first we're going to cut out the pattern pieces. Here I have my 2 pieces for this pattern. Ignore that seam line. I had to sew together 2 pieces of fabric to have a large enough piece for this pattern. Now I'm marking the horizontal center of each piece with a basting stitch. Here I'm marking the center with some chalk so that I can sew along the center. And I chose to do this marking with a basting stitch rather than the chalk alone because during the making of the bonnet, the chalk is going to wear off by the time we do need this reference point later on, and I did not want to mark it with a fabric pen or wax because that might permanently mark the fabric. And no need to tie this off. We do want these stitches to be easily removed later on. Again, they're just to mark the center. Here I am marking the center on the second piece. This stitch does not need to be perfect, just a loose basting stitch across the center to be used as a reference point. Now I will fold the pieces, both pieces, at the markings we just made onto themselves with right sides together. And I'm pinning along the small U-shaped curve, repeating on the second piece. And then I will stitch along these curves in the center. I'm sewing here with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is included on the pattern. Moving on to the second piece, well, again, stitch with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now I will flip both pieces right side out. Set one of these pieces aside and match up the corresponding notches on the other one. So I have here and here, and here and here. I will pin the fabric edge in place. Also pinning the seams here to make sure that this is matched up. Once this is pinned, I'm going to go ahead and sew along the fabric edge right here. Again, this is sewn with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is included for the whole pattern. Now I'm flipping this piece right side out, and there's a small opening here that we will use to loop the second piece through, and that will create kind of a faux knot in the front of the bonnet. So just loop the second piece through this small opening. And then I will match up the corresponding notches on the second piece, here and here, and pin the fabric edge in place. Now, as I'm matching up the second notch, I will be carefully encasing the first piece inside. Matching up the center seam. Now on this piece we'll be doing the same thing, stitching along the fabric edge. However, we'll be leaving a small gap which will be used to flip the bonnet right side out. The gap should be 1.5 inches or 3.5 centimeters. Here I will mark the opening just so I don't forget to leave that while I'm stitching. And just stitch the rest of the fabric edge, skipping that one area. Coming up to the gap, I will tie off and skip that area and then sew the rest of the fabric edge. Now I will match up the first and second piece, matching up the seams here and here on both sides. Now the basting stitches will also match up, and I am pinning around the perimeter of the opening, and then I will go ahead and stitch around the full perimeter. Now I will flip the bonnet right side out through that gap in the stitching. Take your time here. We want to make sure not to rip any of the stitches. Now I will adjust the bonnet so that the basting stitches from the first step are along the top and bottom folds. This may take a little finagling, but just get the stitching along the bottom. And then I'm going to measure 4 inches or 10 centimeters to the left and right of the center back seam and mark both with pins. And then I will sew along the bottom edge to create a casing for the elastic to go into. Now I will remove the basting stitches from the bottom fold. Do not remove the top basting stitches yet. We do still need those. Now I will cut a 6-inch or 15 centimeter piece of elastic to insert in the casing. I will be using safety pins on either end of the elastic to insert it a little easier. The vertical safety pin helps to block the elastic from getting lost in the casing. So I'm going to go ahead and insert through the gap in stitching we have. Once I have the elastic inserted, I'll pin the ends in place, and I would recommend trying it on at this point to adjust the elastic tension as needed in order to fit your head. I'm going to take these safety pins out before I stitch the elastic down. And now I will tack the elastic down on either side. Now I'm going to flip the bonnet inside out again. See the elastic here? This is the bottom, and this is the center back. I'm going to match up the seams here, and then with a needle and thread, I will make a loose running stitch along the seam allowance. This will be used to gather the fabric. No need to be perfect here, and this won't show in the finished product. Okay, now I will pull on the thread to gather the fabric to about 5 inches or 13 centimeters. Just measuring to make sure that I have the right length, and then I'll tie off the thread. Now I will cut a 4-inch or 10 centimeter piece of elastic for the back. I will pin this elastic to the seam allowance with a 1-inch or 2.5 centimeter overhang on both the top and bottom. This overhang will be used to grip onto while I'm sewing. Just checking here to make sure I have enough of an overhang. And then I will sew the elastic to the seam allowance using a wide zigzag stitch, gently tugging on the elastic overhang, stretching it to fit as I go. Here I'll just knot off the thread and then grab the 2 pieces of elastic that are hanging over, line it up so that it's straight, and go ahead and stitch to fasten the elastic down. Trim the elastic ends off. I didn't catch that on camera, but go ahead and do that, and then flip the bonnet right side out again. Now we're going to line up the top edges along the basting stitches and pin them together. Again, getting it to lie with the basting stitches lined up flat takes a little finagling, but just take your time. Once I get this pinned together, I'm going to use my machine to sew 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters from the edge. Although if you want a cleaner finish, feel free to hand sew with an invisible stitch. This is going to be in the inside of the bonnet, so I'm not that worried about it. Before stitching, remove the basting stitches so you don't get those stuck in there. I'm going to go ahead and carefully sew this along the edge. Take your time doing this. It is right up on the edge of the fabric. Okay, now the last step here is to sew this opening closed, which I'm going to do the same way. Just sew about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters from the fabric edge. Again, if you want a cleaner finish, you can hand stitch this closed and it will not be visible. And there you go. Just go ahead and flip it right side out, and we're done.